Hello, this is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service, with reports and analysis from across the world. The latest news 7 days a week. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
This is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Nick Miles, and in the early hours of Wednesday the 11th of July, these are our main stories. Relief and joy across the nation as divers in Thailand rescue all 12 boys and their football coach from flooded caves. The US government says it will not fully comply with a deadline to reunite dozens of immigrant children under the age of 5 with their parents. President Trump says his meeting with the Russian leader Vladimir Putin next week may be easier than a summit with NATO allies starting on Wednesday. Also in this podcast, as NATO leaders gather, we hear from the Estonians who work within shouting distance of their Russian counterparts.
In military jargon, Andres Vist is the most forward of forward deployments. An Estonian border guard gently explaining to me how to avoid accidentally wandering into Russia.
And Ronaldo goes to Juventus. The World Footballer of the Year takes his ball from Madrid to Turin. It's a big deal.
He is a proven winner, fits perfectly in with the club's ethos because the club's motto is winning is not important, it's the only thing that counts. If you apply that to Ronaldo, then it's a match made in heaven, isn't it?
But we begin in Thailand. With some of the hundreds of volunteers reacting to the news of the success of a truly extraordinary operation. The rescue of 12 boys and their football coach, who had been trapped in a flooded cave for more than 2 weeks. Once above ground, the last 4 boys were whisked off in ambulances to make the hour or so journey to join their teammates in hospital in the city of Chiang Rai. There, too, people had lined the streets to share in the jubilation. Meanwhile, the man who led the rescue operation for more than 2 weeks, Narongsak or Sotaknakon, was finally able to celebrate.
Today, the Thai people, Team Thailand, government agencies and the private sector, together with the media and all the international support, no one thought we could make it, but we did it. It was a first for the world.
There's no doubt that it was a tense and extremely dangerous mission. One former Thai Navy diver, Saman Gunan, died in the caves on Friday when he ran out of oxygen. Let's get more from our correspondent Dan Johnson, who was at the cave complex.
There is the euphoria here. This is a better outcome than I think anyone dared to dream possible. And the stress, the tension of the last 2 weeks has kind of been shaved off in layers as each of those ambulances has driven away from the cave site. And when the last one left today with its lights flashing, you could feel the relief wash over people here that finally this was over and that the outcome had been entirely positive. People are thankful, they are happy, and they are astonished at what has actually been achieved.
And Dan, the boys, what's happening to them? I gather agonisingly they haven't been able to hug their family members yet.
No, this is difficult, but I think the officials in charge of the rescue operation just want to be careful. They've seen their families through glass in the hospital. They haven't had that physical contact yet. The parents haven't been able to grab hold of their sons and hug them close, the thing, no doubt, that they've been waiting to do for 18 days now. There are tests being done, blood tests, x-rays on their lungs because there's a worry that they may have breathing difficulties. They're sending off to labs in Bangkok to check for contagious diseases and infections. It could take 24, 48 hours to get that back. They are just being very careful about this, doing everything properly because they just don't know exactly what lurks inside that cave. But the boys are said to be in remarkably good spirits. At least they're together, and they now have been reunited as a team at the hospital, we understand, so they can share this experience with each other, and they can probably read about their own exploits through the media coverage and watch it on TV, and they can start to appreciate the life they've been given back, really, after 18 days underground, 13 lives that can now restart.
And Dan, you mentioned the sense of relief amongst the rescuers, but what about the wider impact across the country? I imagine it's really brought ties together.
Yes, it has. I mean, there's been a huge amount of support here in Chiang Rai in the north of Thailand, a huge operation around the cave entrance, and that's drawn in people from overseas around the world, but also from different parts of this country. It's been a huge effort by the Thai military, the police, the Navy, and a lot of different rescue organisations who've come here from all over to bring their expertise, but also a huge army of volunteers who've travelled, some of them a long way, to offer their support, their services. There have been people here cooking for the rescue workers, laying on relaxation zones where they could go and get a massage, even a haircut. They've built an entire village here because this operation's been running for so long and involving so many people. It'll take a fair bit of time for the whole thing here to wind down. There are another group of rescue workers actually leaving now, and they've been cheering and clapping as they walk away from this cave tonight. They're applauding themselves, really, because it's a phenomenal feat of human endeavour to have overcome every challenge that nature seemed to lay down in their way here. This mission looked impossible, but they've managed to find a solution. They've implemented it almost perfectly, and everybody today has got out alive. Not just the boys and their coach, all the rescue workers are safe too.
Dan Johnson. Well, let's hear from some of the people Dan was talking about there, who are being hailed as the heroes of the mission. Our correspondent Lucy Williamson met some of the divers who helped save the boys' lives.
Guys, congratulations. How are you feeling?
Exhausted.
Their elation hidden under a film of exhaustion, Eric, Mika, Klaus and Per arrived back from the mountain tonight. Rescue divers with barely words or energy to tell their story.
Yeah.
How did it go?
Good. Very good. We feel very safe. Now we need beer and we need sleep. Thank you very much.
Thank you. These are the men who won against a mountain. Heroes from all walks of life, all corners of the world. United not in a single act of bravery, but in dozens of them. Their organiser, Narantorn Nabanchang, is a Thai rock singer who used her public profile to gather donations for the mission, tanks, regulators and hiking equipment. I asked her what they would do tonight.
Celebrate. all country, maybe all around the world. Celebrate for us, for the team, for government, for everybody who has worked very hard.
Narantorn was so sure of success that before today's operation had even begun, she'd booked her divers on flights home tomorrow. They say faith can move mountains. Thailand chose to put its faith in the men who venture inside them.
Lucy Williamson. The fallout from President Trump's zero-tolerance immigration policy continues to cause controversy. After considerable pressure, he agreed to halt the process of separating children from parents who'd illegally crossed into the US from Mexico. But many of them remain apart, including 102 children who are under 5 years of age. As we record this podcast, a deadline set by a US court to reunite them expires in a matter of hours. And the US government says it won't be able to return all the children to their parents in time. Our correspondent in New York, Neda Tawfik, told me why.
The administration had to give a very detailed list of each of these cases. And so the reasons ranged from, the parents having a criminal history that brought up issues where they didn't think it was safe to release the child in their custody, or the parent was actually in criminal custody. And then they also said that in some cases, the adults that the children traveled with were actually not their parents in the end. The administration has been going through background checks, but also trying to conduct DNA tests as well. So those are some of the reasons they gave to the court for why they think, they'd have technically, in their view, met the deadline as best as they could. Now, the American Civil Liberties Union responded back saying, look, we understand that if a parent is in criminal custody, you can't release the child, but the government is putting up all these bureaucratic hurdles.
Meanwhile, there's been a defiant tweet from President Trump.
He was asked about this issue and the fact that the United States will miss the deadline, and he said, I have a solution. Tell people to not come here illegally. Now, I think critics would point to two parts here, the first of which is that people coming to this country seeking asylum, that's not illegal. They are allowed to come here to seek asylum. And secondly, these are children. They shouldn't be kind of collateral damage in all of this. So, again, all of this really is about President Trump trying to remain tough on this immigration issue to appeal to his base.
And briefly, Neda, the 34 that will be released today and the 4 children who've already been reunified, what happens to them and their families now? Where will they be held?
These children are being released now to the Immigration Enforcement Agency. And now the government has basically said that they will put ankle monitors on the families but will not hold them in detention.
That was Neda Tawfik. In this centenary year of the end of the First World War, one of the less celebrated roles played by thousands of Africans is being commemorated. They fought and worked as porters, hoping it would bring a move to independence when the war ended. Now, a piece of performance art about Africa's forgotten role is opening this week in London. Vincent Dowd reports.
The huge Turbine Hall at the Tate Modern Gallery in London is not an obvious home for theatre, but The Head and the Load is an ambitious piece, reclaiming part of African history almost forgotten. It uses an extraordinary variety of music, African and European. South African artist William Kentridge was asked to mark the centenary of the First World War. He realised he knew almost nothing of the enforced contribution of Africa to a European conflict.
There were between 1 and 2 million Africans involved, primarily as porters. In the casualty lists overall, most probably 30,000 soldiers, 300,000 porters, and 700,000 civilians died.
Tatuga Sibizi is the South African co-composer. He says the music's a collage.
Sometimes you're sort of referring on an African war chant, but then it's been infringed upon by a Western waltz, but then you'd have an African hymn sort of coming across at it. At home, you'd sort of call it a mix masala.
Britain's national anthem is sung beautifully, but ironically. Philip Miller is the show's other composer.
There was this incredible tension for black soldiers that they were singing this hymn. So we don't just sing it in that sort of, in the cathedral here in England, we pull it apart, we flip it around, and at some point we do end up with a kind of South African Maskandi, Isiskatamia, 4-part harmony.
Much of what happens in The Head and the Load is set in and around German East Africa, today's Tanzania. Britain was intent victory in Europe would also kick the Kaiser out of Africa. Some Africans thought helping the colonial masters to win a European conflict might bring independence after the war. It didn't. William Kentridge says the world needs to learn there was more to the conflict than the familiar war poets and stories told always by Europeans and Americans.
People in my education and growing up were so filled with Anthem for Doomed Youth and All Quiet on the Western Front that became our image of the First World War. And this is, I suppose, me understanding that there were other poems, there were other histories, there were other lives than those that had followed in the English home counties.
William Kentridge, ending that report by Vincent Dowd. An Israeli organisation says it plans to send a spacecraft to the moon in what will be the first privately funded lunar landing. The small unmanned vessel will be launched in December and should touch down a couple of months later. Our Middle East analyst Alan Johnston reports.
This moonshot was inspired by a competition. It challenged scientists around the world to find cheaper ways to get into space. 3 young Israelis got together in a pub and began to chat about how it might be done. Now their team says it'll be ready to go at the end of the year. Every other mission to the moon, carried out by the Americans, the Russians or the Chinese, has been government-funded. But this project is paid for by an Israeli billionaire. He's putting up the necessary $95 million. If all goes well, the mission will be a source of much Israeli pride. The spacecraft's first task will be to plant the national flag on the lunar surface. Then it'll go to work sending back research data on the moon's magnetic field. The project will showcase Israel's high-tech prowess, advertising an industrial sector that's an important part of the country's economy. And those behind the mission hope it'll help inspire a generation of young Israelis, drawing them into careers in science and engineering.
Alan Johnston. Still to come in this podcast, the unexpected sartorial star of England's World Cup campaign.
It suits him, and he's got to keep wearing it now, hasn't he? He can't not wear it now. Let's hope he gets us there for the final.
The manager's waistcoat under the spotlight. President Trump has flown to Europe for a NATO summit in Brussels, which he's predicted will be harder than his meeting with President Putin of Russia next week. Shortly before he left the US, Mr. Trump tweeted, NATO countries must pay more, the United States must pay less. Very unfair. This drew a sharp rebuke from the European Council President Donald Tusk.
America does not have and will not have a better ally than Europe. Today, Europeans spend on defence many times more than Russia and as much as China. Dear America, appreciate your allies. After all, you don't have that many.
I got more on the fraught relations between the US President and European leaders from our defence and diplomatic correspondent, Jonathan Marcus.
Well, I think the Europeans are well aware of the criticisms that Mr. Trump is making of them. I think all of the NATO leaders from Europe will be trying to emphasise both that overall they are spending more. They're all taking steps to try and make their armed forces more usable, more capable, more mobile and so on. But the fact remains that up to a point, Mr. Trump does have a reasonable argument. It's clear that many European countries are not doing enough. Collectively, they could contribute much more to their own security. The difficulty here, I think, is twofold. One, it's the tone and temper of Mr. Trump's remarks. He's taken this to a whole new level of aggression and unpleasantness. I think the other problem is that from many of his comments, he seems to be raising questions about the utility of NATO to the United States' own security. And I think that makes this summit almost a historic first.
Obviously, after the NATO summit, Mr. Trump will go on within the next few days to meet President Putin of Russia. How concerned will NATO members and European Union leaders be about what comes out of that meeting?
There is a problem. I think many people believe that Mr. Trump seems to prefer the company of authoritarian leaders rather than those of the democracies who are supposedly the United States allies. We know Mr. Trump does not like multilateral agreements. We know he doesn't seem to like big international organisations, the European Union, maybe even aspects of NATO.
Jonathan Marcus on President Trump's dissatisfaction with the state of the Western military alliance. What then does it feel like out in the borderlands of NATO? Our Europe correspondent Kevin Connolly travelled to the Baltic Republic of Estonia, which shares a long border with Russia, to assess its view of NATO in the age of Trump.
As you head southeast out of Tallinn through the forest-fringed farmland of Estonia, Russia doesn't just sound like it's getting closer. It is getting closer. Hi, guys.
Hello. So,
in military jargon, Andris Vist is the most forward of forward deployments. An Estonian border guard gently explaining to me how to avoid accidentally wandering into Russia.
We have a sign there that forbids cars from parking there, just stopping there for 50 meters.
When you consider that this is the eastern frontier of both NATO and the European Union, the border is a little softer looking than you might think. Certainly no Berlin Wall.
Through the trees you can't see, but there is a Russian post also.
And do you ever see those guys?
Of course, yeah. They do the same thing. They also patrol.
But the protocol is no big friendly conversation, just a salute.
There's like no protocol. We're all people.
It's not just the grandfather clock in his office that gives the Estonian Interior Minister, Andres Anvelt, a sense of time. There's the old railway map on his wall, showing Estonia's borders as they were in the 1920s, during its brief flickering of independence between the wars.
And the border was going like that, here, and to the Narva River, And so we lost, I think, some few kilometers.
So this is the independent Republic of Estonia. I see the map is 1929.
Yes, exactly. But,
Then, as now, Estonia's relationship with its giant eastern neighbour was wary and watchful. The difference now, says the minister, is that Estonia firmly believes that NATO stands solidly behind it.
Russia is building up its military activeness, but for us, I think the best thing is not to be in some panic, but work together with our core partners, like Britain and other states. We are ready, but we are not in panic.
In the building next door to the Interior Ministry, the old KGB interrogation cells have been carefully preserved, a reminder of the realities of Soviet occupation. The job of deterring Vladimir Putin's Russia falls to a NATO battle group in which the UK plays a leading role. Its commander, Colonel Giles Harris, told me that as one of Britain's largest overseas deployments, this is a clear signal to Russia that NATO's all-for-one and one-for-all guarantee is real.
We do maintain an element of readiness, because that's an important part of the message. Being here is one thing, but we need to demonstrate that we will react if something does happen. But a lot of that is based on how we perceive the situation and indications and warnings. And of course, at the moment, there's nothing to suggest that would happen imminently. So very much a defensive posture.
The cathedral bells of Freedom Square might sound like a child picking out a tune on a xylophone, but they ring out across an independent capital city whose confidence is bolstered by Estonian NATO membership. Donald Trump's unpredictable approach to the alliance might create an undercurrent of anxiety. But here, on the Western world's eastern frontier, there's a powerful sense of NATO's mission and a passionate belief in its guarantees.
Kevin Connolly reporting from Estonia. One of the world's most celebrated, well-paid and high-profile sports stars has moved clubs. Cristiano Ronaldo, 5 times winner of World Footballer of the Year, has gone from the current European champions, Real Madrid, where he's been for 9 years, to Juventus in Italy. Adam Digby is a football journalist based in Italy. Tim Franks asked him why Ronaldo had swapped Madrid for Turin.
A combination of wanting to leave Madrid, wanting a new challenge, and then once you decide that, I guess from his point of view, a lot of the usual avenues that obviously Barcelona would be a non-starter, Paris Saint-Germain are going to have the Mbappe and Neymar already in there. That kind of narrows it down to the likes of Juventus or Bayern Munich or a return to England. And I suppose from his point of view, with Manchester United, he's already been there and won the Champions League and the Premier League title. If you're looking for something new, then I guess Juventus represent that. And then obviously from a Juve point of view, if they can afford to sign one of the best players in the world, then you would take that risk every time.
Presumably he's going to command stratospherically high wages at Juventus.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be something in the region of 30 million euros a season before tax. And Juve's previous highest earners, Gonzalo Higuain and Paulo Dybala, are on around 13 million euros. So triple what anybody at the club is earning already.
How's he regarded in Italy? Because, I mean, clearly there is no doubt that he is a supremely gifted, very diligent, hard-working footballer. He's also not to everybody's tastes. What's the view of him in Italy?
Very much along those lines, but I think because it's Juventus, the fact that whatever else he does, he is a proven winner, fits perfectly in with the club's ethos, because Juventus have a horrible reputation stemming from Calciopoli, the match-fixing scandal in 2006 that saw them relegated to the second division. But the club's motto is winning is not important, it's the only thing that counts. And I guess if you apply that to Ronaldo, then it's a match made in heaven, isn't it?
He's not renowned as being necessarily the ultimate team player, to put it politely. Do you think he will fit in with the other stars at Juve?
Over the past few seasons, at least, as they've come to dominate Serie A, Juventus have very clearly aimed their focus on the Champions League. They haven't won it since 1996. They've been knocked out in each of the past 2 seasons, once in the quarterfinals, once in the final, basically by Cristiano Ronaldo. From that point of view, it's very much a case of if you can't beat them, get him to join you, I guess. It's the ultimate power move of he's the hump that's in their way for this aim that they've very clearly focused upon over the past 2 or 3 seasons. And now he's playing alongside them. I think as long as he helps them to achieve that goal, I don't see that being a problem for anybody. I think it can only ever be a short-term move. He's 33 years old already. He hasn't got that long left at his peak. And clearly Juventus hope to get the very best out of him for a couple of seasons.
Are you excited about him coming?
Very much so. It's going to mean a renewed focus on Juventus. It puts them back in the conversation as one of the very biggest teams in Europe, doesn't it? And it kind of brings an added lure to the rest of Serie A as a whole, and for the extra eyes and the extra expenditure that brings upon the league in general.
And just in terms of the expenditure, I mean, the fee itself, about $140 million, an annual salary of $30+ million a year. I know Juve's a big club, but can they afford it?
Well, they've got 1 or 2 squad players who look like they're going to be sacrificed. And then there's also the news that as the Italian Stock Exchange closed just before we started speaking tonight, the Juventus share price is at the highest it's been in 2 years and has risen by 35% since rumours of this transfer first broke last week. So I guess it's kind of paying for itself already.
Adam Digby. Well, as Ronaldo contemplates his new footballing home, the sport is fueling an unusual fashion fad developing here in England: waistcoats. England's manager Gareth Southgate began wearing one at the start of his team's World Cup campaign. Now, as they prepare to face Croatia in the second World Cup semi-final on Wednesday, supplies of the sleeveless jacket have begun to run out. The newsroom's Richard Hamilton has been finding out more.
Gareth Southgate's newfound reputation as a style icon is one of the more unlikely developments in a thoroughly unpredictable World Cup. Once the preserve of Edwardian gentlemen and 1980s snooker players, now it seems almost everybody is wearing one. The British department store Marks & Spencer, the official supplier of the team's suits, has seen a 35% increase in waistcoat sales, but is now running out. I spoke to these shoppers outside a store in Oxford Street in London.
Yeah, I think he looks smart in it, and it's typical English sort of dress sense. It suits him. And he's got to keep wearing it now, hasn't he? He can't not wear it now.
We'll be talking about this in 50 years' time, just like we talk about 1966.
Well, it's very classic. It's very low-key.
And are you going to get your boyfriend a waistcoat?
Maybe.
I gather they're running out. Their stocks are running low. They've just got XXL left. I don't know what size your boyfriend is.
Medium to large.
The British cancer charity Bloodwise has come up with the idea of Waistcoat Wednesday. Their chief executive is Gemma Peters.
So the idea came from one of my team who loves football, and we were talking about how everyone in the office had got swept up in World Cup fever and what could we do, and we thought wearing a waistcoat would be a good way to honour Gareth and everything he's done, but also support the team and maybe raise some awareness, we thought, for Bloodwise and blood cancer at the same time.
The waistcoat has even seeped into social media. Southgate's iconic piece of clothing has its own spoof Twitter account with the slogan "Fashion's Coming Home," a pun on an England World Cup song. And the British actor Hugh Grant tweeted ahead of England's last game, "I'm wearing a waistcoat, just a waistcoat."
That was Richard Hamilton. And that's all from us for now, but there will be an updated version of the Global News podcast later. If you want to comment on this podcast or the topics covered in it, you can send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Nick Miles. Until next time, goodbye.